and welcome to today's Ask the Experts webinar, Win-Win Parenting, Child Safety, Autonomy, and Family Harmony in the Digital Age. I am Kris Perry, Executive Director of Children and Screens, Institute of Digital Media and Child Development. Parenting in today's rapidly changing digital world can often feel like an overwhelming challenge, with new technologies, platforms, and trends emerging faster than ever. How can parents and caregivers effectively guide their children's media use in a way that reduces conflict, fosters independence, and helps guard against the development of problematic media use? With the right strategies and a balanced and intentional approach to parenting, it is possible to achieve these goals. In today's webinar, our panel of experts will share research-backed strategies and practical tips on how to promote child well-being, independence, and healthy digital media use while supporting connected family relationships. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's moderator, Dr. Elizabeth Milovidov. Elizabeth is the founder of digitalparentingcoach.com, a resource for parents and caregivers. As a lawyer, law professor, and child online protection expert with more than 20 years of experience, she has advised government and child protection agencies, nonprofits, and think tanks on digital safety, parenting, and well-being. Currently, she is senior corporate counsel supporting the LEGO Group in implementing and promoting digital child rights, safety, and well-being in digital gaming and metaverse experiences. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Kris. I mean, it's just going to be so much fun. Always a fun to be here with you guys. So, shall I just take us off and get us started? I guess I will. So I am really excited to be the moderator today because we have some fantastic experts who are here to share real practical information, insights, and strategies. But I really just want to pull you back for a second because I want you all to remember, what we're seeing. We know that this is different, right? Parenting is different today, but is it really? Technology is evolving at just lightning speed, and we know that it's not just about screen time limits, but we're talking about we need to build habits that promote independence, critical thinking, and well-being. But the best news is you've got Children and Screens Institute. You have experts like the ones on this panel. And you don't have to be a tech expert in order to be a great digital parent. So we're going to give you as many strategies as possible so that no matter what your approach is, your presence and your strategies will be able to help you really take care of this. So I think just to lay out a tiny bit of the scene here, I think we all know that the digital landscape, it's just, it's a challenge, right? If we go on media, you're seeing, the news, you're seeing misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, I don't know, new games, new apps. I mean, there's so many things that are happening, not to even mention TikTok and trends and AI generated content, et cetera. So the whole thing is that there's so much just looking for our children's attention, trying to capture their attention, trying to hold their attention, trying to keep them scrolling. And in our families, mine as well, this can cause some conflict over screen time use, device use, reduced independence. We're always trying to figure out ways to help our children self-regulate, self-control. And of course, there's also just that whole issue of problematic behaviors, which I'm so happy that we have true clinical psychologists here to tell you what is the real deal. But I think that's what is so important and what I love about being here with the Children and Screens Institute is that their approach is the same one that I have been advocating for years. And that is instead of fighting against technology, we need to focus on how we can guide our children through it, right? So we need to find some balance and some intentional parenting approaches. We need to, let go of this whole idea of authoritative, all the things I'm talking about. It's not always about strict rules for complete freedom. It's about balance. It's about intention. It's about mindfulness. So, we're going to try to shift those conversations. Instead of saying things like, put that down, we're going to say things like, well, what did you enjoy about that? What's so cool about that? Show me. Let's talk about it. Talking about setting some digital boundaries that make sense. And of course, the big one in my house is teaching my own boys how to self-regulate, teaching them to recognize themselves when they're having tantrums or when something is going to affect their mood or their emotions, their focus, their behavior, their schoolwork. And I'm not going to say lead by example because I know that you are already thinking that you want to be good role models. And I know that that's difficult too, which is why, again, the panelists are here to help you as a parent and a caregiver, and perhaps you're an educator as well, because it's all of us that are around these children that are creating this community. So we want to use technology to connect, of course, not just be, not just consume it, not just be consummators of technology, but we want to encourage our children to use it creatively, responsibly, to do problem solving, to look at real world engagement and not just passive scrolling, which has its place. I'm not going to lie. So before I get started and introduce you to our first panelists, I really just want to remind you to, if you have any questions, write them down because these people are here for you. And there will be a recording, so be prepared to go on that website and check them all out. There are tons and tons of valuable resources for you, but you have to do the work. So my final thought too is this power of parenting with purpose. When we are parenting with intention, we are reducing those conflicts again. We are building that independence, and we are creating a foundation for healthy digital habits. You are not alone in all this. Like I said, you've got all of these people to ask some questions, myself as well. And I really want you to realize, I know it sounds cliche, but the goal isn't to be perfect, right? The goal is to be present. And I promise you, digital parents, digital caregivers, you have so got this, okay? So let me stop talking and get ready to introduce you to our very first panelist. So this is going to be going fast here, so I want you to be ready. I have with me Dr. Sarah Coyne, who is a professor of human development in the School of Family Life at Brigham Young University. She received her BSc degree in psychology from Utah State University and her PhD in psychology from the University of Central Lancashire in Preston, England, which is where I'm based right now. Not Preston, England, but London, England. Her research involves media, aggression, gender, mental health, and one of my favorites, child development. Dr. Coyne has over 200, yeah, I did not stutter, 200 publications on these and other topics, and she regularly speaks to families and teenagers about using media in positive ways. And get this, she knows what she's talking about because she has 5 kids and she lives in Utah. So Dr. Sarah, it is over to you.
Hey, thank you so much. Today I'm gonna provide kind of an overview of the research and strategies around parenting for raising digital natives. So these are kids that have grown up with media almost since they were born. So let's just get right into it. So I am very quickly going to go through 4 parental mediation strategies. We also call them parental monitoring strategies, right? These are the things that parents do to help their kids with media use and then also to monitor those. And this is where the bulk of the research has been. So the first one is called restrictive mediation. These are all of the rules and the regulations that you set as parents. It can also be set in schools. It can be set by the government. I was just in a hearing yesterday around banning cell phones in schools, right? That would fit into the restrictive mediation. So this is, limits on screen time. This is no screens at the dinner table or driving or, whatever those rules are that you guys have. The second one is active mediation. The intent of active mediation is to help your kids become critical consumers of media. And we do these through discussions before they use media, during when they use media, after they use media, and so on. But it's just really to get their minds thinking, right? It's all those conversations you have fits into this bucket. Then we have co-viewing. Co-viewing is when you're using media with your child. So you're watching television together, you're playing video games, you're watching YouTube short, you're on social media together, right? All of that co-use. And then finally, we have something called deference. And deference has been researched by far the least, but I think it's fascinating. So this is a proactive parenting strategy where parents actively do nothing. And you're like, what is that? They actively do nothing. And so they really let their kids take the reins on their media use. Usually this happens a little bit later on in development where parents have used restrictive, active, and co-viewing for many, many years. And they say, you know what? At this point, I really value your autonomy. I respect you. I trust you. And so I'm going to back off on some of these. All right. So parental mediation works for the most part. Here are two meta-analyses that have take together all of the research that has ever been done on parental mediation. So it represents hundreds and hundreds of studies. So for example, restrictive mediation tends to decrease media time and inappropriate content. And we know that active mediation and co-viewing decreases media risk. So it kind of mitigates some of those negative effects. So like kids tend to be less aggressive, say after watching violent media, or less likely to engage in sexual activity or substance use, or have less problematic media, or so on, right? So those are really great. However, other research shows that the effects are kind of small and sometimes can be counterintuitive. So for example, we just did a nationally representative sample on parenting and media. And we found that restrictive mediation was actually related to worse adolescent mental health and body image, especially for older kids, right? And so what I want to do next, because these effects are kind of small to moderate and sometimes can backfire, I really want to talk about how kids can thrive on media with the recognition that it really can depend. And so I'm going to give you 5 C's of media use. And these are just barely released from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we're going to apply them to the parental mediation strategies to give you kind of a more nuanced view of this whole thing, to help give you tools to help your child really, really succeed in this space. And we'll go over each one in turn. All right, the first one is child. So we know every child is different. So I'm a developmental psychologist, and I'm very, very interested in individual differences. So I want you to think about your child or the children that you work with, right? Who is your child? How do they react to media, and what is their motivation for using it, right? What is your child's personality? You might think, I have a kid that's really, really good at self-regulation. That might be a kid where you can use more deference. Or you might say, I have a kid that's really, really impulsive. They need a little bit more guidance. They're going to respond a little bit better and need a little bit more rules and so on. And then what does your child value, and how does social media help or hurt those values, helping them to identify those values and really having those big conversations. As one example, I have a child who identifies as LGBTQ. And this particular child was on social media a little bit earlier than some of my older kids because she needed that community and she needed that space. She was getting bullied at school. We live in a really conservative community, and this was really important to her. So I had to be really flexible in terms of the rules and the ages that I thought were good. I was like, this child's a little bit different. They have different needs. That's really important. Number 2 is content. So what kinds of interactions does your child have on social media or media in general? And I always, whenever I talk to teens, I always ask them 2 questions. So what is positive, uplifting, and good about their social media use or any media use? Because we know it's not just about screen time. I loved Elizabeth's message to start us out, right? Screen time is actually very weakly related to negative outcomes. It's all about these other things, okay? So if I'm spending hours on social media, for example, and it's all really positive and uplifting and so on, it can have tremendously positive impacts. On the flip side, what is not so positive, uplifting, or good about social media, right? And those are the things we want to talk about and try to limit. Number 3 is calm. So a lot of research looks at the reasons why children use media. And we know that certain reasons tend to be related to better outcomes than other reasons. Now, using media to calm down has probably received some of the most attention here. And sometimes it can be effective, but for the most part, especially with young kids, it can kind of backfire and relates to problematic media use later on, especially if it's the only tool that they have. It's also really important to think about things like, how does your child get to sleep at night? We know that sleep is one of the best protective factors for mental health. And so how do they dial down from the day? What is in their toolbox? What are there in their strategies for calming down? Number 4 is crowding out. So again, instead of just always trying to take away the phones, reduce screen time, right? Kind of reframing, instead of just reducing screen time, what does your child want to get back? And then what are some effective parental mediation strategies that we talked about earlier that might be effective to reduce that crowding out? Can they do it on their own? Do they need parental help? And so on. And then what does your child want to change about tech in their life, right? Asking those questions, being really, really curious. And then the last C is communication. And this is, active mediation, all about active mediation. But I want to give you just some ideas about how to ask these questions. So number one, asking over assuming. So what is your view of TikTok? Right? Instead of being like, stop using TikTok. Why do you like it? What's great about having Snapchat and what can get tricky? What do you wish I understood about your gaming? Like, let me in. Be really curious. Empathy over eye rolling. So it must feel really stressful to feel pressure to keep your Snap streak going. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand why you need Snapchat streak, but that seems important to you. Okay? Help me understand. Complexity over commandments. So, really diving into the complexity. So if a friend asks for honest opinions on an anonymous app, should you respond honestly, even if it might hurt their feelings? In other words, which is more important, honesty or kindness? And then normalize without minimizing. So instead of just saying, just get off Instagram, right? You know what? That social comparison, that happens to me too. It's a real struggle with social media. It's hard and can make you feel like you aren't good enough, right? So we're talking about a different level of parenting in terms of media. And I want to end with this slide. Something I study is media guilt and media parental efficacy. So this idea of most parents, the vast majority of parents think they're not doing good enough. Most parents feel really guilty over their child's screen use and their own chat and their own screen use. And I just want to end with, we could do it, right? We can do this. We can have the conversations, right? We can use parental media strategies in effective ways. We can empower our kids to use their devices in ways that will help them to thrive and not just survive in this digital environment. And I think that is my time. So
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Sarah. It was just really, I love it. I love the 5 Cs. I think that just based on at the very end here, as you were talking about how they can do it, they can do it. I think one of the things that I hear a lot from parents and caregivers is just about, what do I do when my partner, my spouse, they have different views about, how we handle screen time. So, and how do we, look at appropriate content? What I think is appropriate, what does someone else think is appropriate? So, can you just share some tips and strategies there for us?
Yes, this is really, really important to think about in terms of a couple context, because we know that like if one parent is really lax on the rules and another is restrictive, like they'll always go to the one that's lax and try to push the boundaries, and then that can cause conflict in the spousal relationship, right? And so what I would recommend there is that you guys work together, and it will take work to get on the same page before you come to your children. So you don't want to be arguing over this when your kid is in the room, right? And so take some time, take some space, use all the communication skills that you know to come to some sort of agreement and compromise that you can both agree with. So then you bring a united front to your children. And sometimes, right, if it's really bad, it might need outside help. You might need to go see, a mediator or a therapist or a friend or something to be like, we need to have a united front on this.
Great. Thank you so much. And I was asking for a friend.
Yeah. I was answering for a friend.
Okay, so next I'm going to introduce Catherine to you. So Dr. Catherine Page Jeffery, she's a lecturer and researcher in the discipline of media and communication at the University of Sydney. Ooh, I know it must be very late. Catherine's current research addresses digital media and families with a particular focus on my favorite theme, parenting in the digital age. Her research has been published in leading international journals, and prior to entering academia, Catherine worked in online content regulation and cyber safety education for the federal government. Over to you, Dr. Catherine.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that introduction. Right. So parenting in the digital world. So look, we've had a great introduction to this topic already. Sarah has so helpfully talked about the different mediation strategies, which is great because I'm going to be building on some of these. Some of my more recent research has looked at family conflict and the ways in which negotiations around digital media create family conflict and what we might be able to do about this. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the main points that I'm going to be talking about in my 8 minutes. First point, media panics heighten parental anxiety about digital media. No surprises there. Parents then mediate their children's digital media use in response to those concerns, but it's not necessarily easy and they face several challenges in doing so. Parental mediation of young people's digital media use is a common source of parent-child conflict, which affects family cohesion and well-being. More democratic and communicative approaches to digital parenting are called for, and Sarah already touched on some of these with her C of communication. And look, I just want to state up front that my perspective and my research has focused on adolescents. Digital parenting, of course, changes as young people get older. And parents typically engage in different mediation practices based on the age of their child. So much younger children are usually subjected to much more restrictive mediation, but as young people transition into adolescence, parents tend to change their mediation style. So the tips that I'm going to be giving focus more on parenting adolescents rather than young children. Okay, so media panics, moral panics, there's a whole kind of theoretical framework around moral panics where we have this kind of collective anxiety about something, and the mass media kind of partially kind of constructs this. And of course, the issue of young people and media has been an ongoing source of collective anxiety and a media panic for a very long time. So, I've just got a few headlines here from Australia. There have been panics around, in the early days of the internet, around pornography and predators, mobile phone use more recently around screen time, screen addiction, gaming, what it's doing to teen brains, to our language, cyberbullying, sexting, all sorts of things. I've got a screenshot there of Jonathan Haidt's book around the anxious generation. Making these grand claims about how damaging media can be. And we do lose a lot of the nuance within this. It's worth remembering that there is a very long history of media panics around young people's use of media, even though a lot of these debates play out as though this is a new problem, the likes of which we haven't seen before. Sure, new media does have additional affordances, which we do need to grapple with, but we've had a lot of these same concerns all the way back to television, and before that with like landline telephones, comic books, movies, and so on. Okay, so what do these media panics do? Well, it elicits parental anxiety. So parents are concerned. So my research has focused on parents' anxieties about their children's use of digital media. So parents, of course, want to do the right thing. They have their children's best interests and well-being at the forefront of typically everything that they do. So parents do engage in these mediation strategies to try and minimize these risks that they're so acutely aware of. But as Sarah has just talked about, digital media, of course, do present opportunities for children. So it's not simply a matter of trying to restrict or ban, and this is increasingly difficult given how much we rely on digital technologies for school, for connection, for all sorts of things. So the challenges for families, of course, is navigating digital media use in a way that maximizes the benefits of digital media while minimizing the risks. But not so easily done. So negotiating digital media and there's quite a bit of research on this, it can create this kind of conflict. It can produce these qualitative changes in family functioning. Digital media can also reconfigure family relations and disrupt these hierarchies of expertise. What do we mean by that? Well, young people often have more expertise and knowledge about digital media than their parents. So it's subverting this traditional relationship of parents being in this position of authority and the young person, learning from their parents. this kind of shapes family dynamics in different ways. Parental attempts, particularly in relation to restrictive mediation, so taking the device away or banning certain activities or platforms, can elicit adolescent reactance. Adolescents are developing their own autonomy, and privacy in the online world is a very powerful space where they can enact their autonomy. So that then will create family conflict, particularly when parents try and engage in these restrictive mediation practices. So what's the answer here? And again, just a reminder that I'm talking about older children and adolescents. And I suggest that we need more kind of democratic approaches to parenting in the digital age. The enabling forms of mediation, which I should also note is usually used interchangeably with active mediation, which Sarah has already talked about, which involves talking things over with young people. And importantly, I suggest that actually involving children in decisions which affect them is more likely to succeed in terms of encouraging parent-child dialogue. So it's about that communication that Sarah has already touched on. So key takeaways here. Remember that media is important to your children and offers many benefits. It is easy to forget about those benefits when often all we hear about are the potential risks, the potential harms, and so much is written about the dangers of media. Remember that there are many benefits as well. Show an interest in your child's media use, ask questions. So just confirming again what Sarah just said about communication. A lot of parents, that I have talked to as part of my research have said, it's with my older child, it's too hard to mediate their children, their use any longer. I just rely on trust and dialogue. It's really the only thing that works. However, when parents actually kind of talk about what they mean by trust and dialogue, it became quite apparent that parents aren't really engaging in a dialogue. It's more of a lecture. It's more risk talk. It's more parents conveying the key messages about online safety. And it's not really about asking questions or finding out what their children like doing online. And I think that's a problem. So you might want to consider a family tech agreement as a way of establishing some of the ground rules around use, and you work that out with your child. And importantly, that might also put some responsibility on to parents themselves. So it's not all this top-down authoritarian style of parenting. You will do this, because we found that those kind of approaches will usually result in either conflict or young people going and doing things behind their parents' back. But if you establish rules around use, so for example, no devices at the dinner table, that should apply to parents as well. And if a young adolescent says, "Okay, look, I agree not to do this, but I'd like you to not be on your phone when you're watching my soccer match at the weekend." Okay, so there should be that kind of mutual agreement and negotiation there. What you want to do is create the conditions in your relationship where your child will come to you with problems rather than hiding it. So if you start those conversations early, then hopefully your child will come to you if and when they encounter anything challenging online. This is a little plug for my book, forthcoming in March, where I talk about all of this and sort of talk about going beyond media panics towards a new theory of parental mediation, which is more democratic and based on parent-child dialogue.
Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely love it. I'm just feeling what you're saying, especially about the soccer match and parents being scrolling, etc. I don't do that. But I think that parents are also a little bit concerned about the SEX topic. And one of the things you had mentioned was, this disrupting the expertise and about more knowledge. And when we're talking about relationships, it's clear that our children and young people don't have more knowledge about these things. They may have a little bit more knowledge about technology, but, how is it that parents and caregivers can sort of overcome this discomfort about speaking about these touchy relationship issues with their children throughout their development?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I've actually just written a paper about pornography because I know that is a main concern of parents. Parents that I've talked to have said, I've not talked about this with my child because, to be honest, I don't think they're even thinking about that yet. And it might be a parent of a 14-year-old boy saying, I don't even think he's like looking at porn or thinking about sex. And I think well, look, he most probably is. Young people are increasingly seeing pornography at an earlier age.
Right, and
Yeah,
they're also seeing it. They can see it by accident too. I think parents
they
don't realize
can.
that. They think that their children are out, looking for this. Someone's like, they can see it by accident
Well, it's often the case that young people send each other this kind of stuff,
too.
right?
Right.
So, a lot of you do need to talk to young people about it, and I think in terms of getting over the discomfort, the earlier you start, then it's never really an issue. If sex and pornography and all of those things is talked about very early, it's never really awkward. It's only awkward if you kind of leave it and then your child gets to a certain age and you feel like you have to have that talk. Like, you have that talk kind of once and then you say, phew, I've dealt with it. This is just it's not the case at all. You need to talk about it really, really early. But also what we advocate for in this paper is, again, not just engaging in the risk talk. Parents often say pornography is bad. You'll probably see it. But you should not go out and look for it and it's not real. They reproduce the risk talk around it. That's kind of problematic, actually. In fact, that's almost as problematic as, sort of in some ways, young people being exposed to porn, that kind of risk talk, because it creates shame. So then young people who are often developing their kind of, they're going through their own sexual development and might be exploring their sexual identity. Many will often seek out porn as part of that process. When they are told by so many people, porn is misogynistic, porn is not real, porn is bad, then what you have is young people, and often young men or adolescent boys, saying, getting this guilt and shame around accessing pornography. And they say, I look at porn, but I don't hate women, I promise. So that risk talk around pornography is a real problem, because also young people, 15, 16, 17-year-olds might seek it out as part of their own pleasure and sexual development. If they're always told that's bad, that's shameful, that's a problem as well.
Yeah.
So we do very much need to change the conversation around pornography as being bad. Don't look at it because that is creating shame. But again, starting those conversations early and not just having the talk once. It needs to be an ongoing thing.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Yes, no, I really hear you about, having these continued conversations. And I think that it's also just about talking about relationships. So that way you already have this sort of communication with your children about these topics. But thank you. I'm going to head over to Dr. Adam Pletter, who is a friend of mine as well, licensed clinical psychologist and digital parenting expert. We've done a couple of things together. He received his doctoral degree from the George Washington University and specializes in treating children, adolescents, and young adults in his Bethesda, Maryland office. I think I'm saying it like with a California accent. So sorry. Dr. Pletter consults with parents and technology companies to balance the many benefits of the digital world with healthy child development and mental health. He has also created the iParent 101 curriculum, which includes webinars, keynote speaking events, free online tutorials, and an ebook. All of this with the goal to empower parents with tools to navigate the complexities of raising children in a digital world. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and pleasure seeing you again, Elizabeth. I'm going to jump in, and for my time here, I'm really going to try to help talk through this nuanced question of how much of our families, parents and children, uh, digital use, screen time. I know that's a lot of things, but we lump it together. Is a problem or just part of our modern life? It's a huge question in my family and in my clinical practice every day, every hour of my day. That is a huge question. Usually, if you're in my office, someone already has determined that there's some level of clinical concern. And that's what I'm going to try to help us understand today, that line. So I'm going to start with sort of this question or statement of critical machines and technologies. It's critical to our modern life that are indispensable, offer both remarkable advantages and significant risks. All types of different machines. So let's start with something very basic, and that is driving a car. It's a huge machine. There's risk. There's danger. If you're a parent of a teenager who has taught someone to drive a car, you know that level of parental anxiety sitting in the passenger seat. I've done it twice now. Level of worry, level of risk is there for sure. And the piece that I encourage you to think about is if you're ever driving and looking for parking or driving in bad weather, there's this phenomenon that if you lower the volume of your radio, if you were listening to music, or a podcast. Screen Deep is a great podcast, by the way. Lowering the volume helps you see better. It helps you see the bad weather of the road. It helps us see better because there's less stimulation coming at us, which the way our brains work, we can only focus on one thing technically at a time. So we're shifting our attention constantly back and forth. That's how the human brain is designed. No matter the age, as we practice more, as we get older, we get better at shifting our attention. That's an executive function, which we could talk about later. But it was a meme that came through as I was putting this presentation together. And it just kind of made me laugh that lowering the volume makes us see better. But it made me think that it's actually relevant here in the sense that the amount of stimulation coming at us does impact and interfere with our ability to think. And that is the inroad to this basic concept of being able to turn the volume down. Again, this is a nuanced approach. I'm glad other people have used that word already. It's not all or nothing. This is a nuanced understanding of where that clinical line is. So, speaking of screens and phones, this was my first phone. I would just like to include that. Today's devices, again, just to state the obvious, are all-in-one devices, and they have tremendous, major life enhancements that we cannot skip over. The efficiency of this technology enhances the flow of information and communication and provides greater stimulation, which pulls us in. And when there's so many things, look around that screen coming at us, there is the potential for that trade-off, that compromise of cognitive overload. So it does require a nuanced approach. And when things are nuanced as humans, it makes us, especially as parents, but our kids too, it makes us uneasy. We like all or nothing thinking. It makes us feel better. It's simpler. It's either this or it's that. And it's in our increasingly polarized world, is it a coincidence that with all of this information sharing, good information, bad information, fake news, whatever, that it makes us anxious and uneasy as parents for sure. And we want to rely on this all or nothing thinking. And so the question really comes down to the level of clinical interference. So I offer you from my clinical office these three markers of looking at in terms of your concerns, looking at the frequency of the concerns, the intensity of the concerns, and the duration of how long they last. And I'm going to talk more about that as we go. So in general, thinking of those three markers, frequency, intensity, and duration of the symptoms, ask yourself about your kids. Again, you're raising a future adult. Sorry to state the obvious, but I work with teens and adolescents, and I state the obvious a lot. We are raising future adults, and our reference point is very different than theirs. 2005 was when YouTube was released, just for the record. My daughter, who's now almost 21, was born in 2004. She doesn't know a world without YouTube. So ask yourself, are they physically healthy? Are they sleeping enough? Developing appropriate connections online and off, they both count. Appropriately engage in schools, engaged in having fun, learning digital skills, all of this around engaging with their world as they're learning and practicing to be the future adults they need to be. So my approach in my office, and certainly what I have lots of free resources on my website about, is this curriculum leaning in on doing things with more intention to increase the dialogue and boundary setting. You heard a lot about those C's earlier, and the research. All of this sort of, without even knowing it at the time, because I created this probably 10, 15 years ago, I think you're going to see a lot of those C's in here. So begin as young as possible, even with clip art. Start to have some basic, you can call it restrictive if you want, but evolving. We're not just holding them back and saying, you're not allowed to do these things. Hold on and set clear boundaries and rules. Have basic ideas. I recommend healthychildren.org. As a way of creating a collaborative media plan. Have some understanding of the devices that they're using and attempt, because they don't always work, often they don't, to have some basic parental controls set up. Even if they don't work, you could then help them by saying, hey, I thought I set a time limit or an app limit, whatever. It doesn't seem to be working. Oh, it's not working again, because it often doesn't. And you could have that dialogue around how, the screen time controls or whatever, it doesn't work. You could also have different choices before jumping to the iPhone or the latest and greatest, having other versions, dumb phones, watches, tablets. There's a tremendous market out there with really well-intentioned companies coming up with some good options. And attend to the positive behaviors, this give and take back and forth in the collaborative conversation, so you could offer more guidance and access as they get older and they're demonstrating safe and appropriate behaviors. So just very quickly here, in terms of case study, this one is, you could see he's impacted, but it's not clinically interfering. Let me just take one more minute here. I include these lists, which we could go back to in the Q&A, but it's really about the clinical significance of the impairment, looking at those three markers, getting in their way of their lives and their development. This child at age 16 is, in fact, impacted. Is impacted. You could see she's up throughout the sleep deprivation. She's failing her classes. There's significant impact that would raise any concerned parent's concern. So again, sometimes there's questions of chicken and the egg. I'm almost done. But all of these things, the digital stimulation impacts attention, anxiety, mood, and social functioning. And you want to be able to look at the level of significant interference in their lives. Often when there's an addiction or a clinical concern, there's deception, there's withdrawal, there's tolerance. It's evolved in a negative spiraling direction that obviously is concerning. And so it comes back to this compromise of the trade-off. And so I encourage us to lean in on the biology. We are animals. We're social animals. Use the five senses, how we're taking in information, all five senses, including smell and taste and all of them, to help us reset. And breathing and getting up and moving around is really key.
Perfect.
So
I'm going to jump in right there and ask you to answer in just like 30 seconds. How is it then that we can get kids to focus? Just because based on everything you're talking about, the level of disruption and all these things, how can we get our child to focus more on these healthy life skills rather than just playing video games? It's a 30-second answer, Adam.
Yep. So the 30-second answer is, depending on the kid's age, just like someone said earlier, it depends. I would have ways of forcing that dialogue. I use Wi-Fi routers all the time. If gaming is the main thing that pulls them in, having the Xbox paused where the child or teenager has to come to you and very quickly say, hey, dad, mom, I want to play, I'm going to get on the game. You could have a brief 10 seconds conversation of what you're doing, who you're playing with, and you take out your phone and you hit on pause and they're rolling. But it forces them to slow down and regulate and have this dialogue.
Okay, so I've heard the regulation is our key term there. Thank you, Adam. I'm going to come back to that in the follow-up because I'm sure we're going to have some more there. Let me introduce now our last panelist, Emily. And Emily, I'm going to just say so quickly so I can give you more time here. Emily is a Screentime consultant, former middle school English teacher and parent of 2. She consults with parents and she offers school presentations and professional development training. And she writes about her tech-intentional approach to parenting, education, and screen time. She's also a guest lecturer at the University of Washington School of Public Policy, and her work has been featured in numerous outlets, including the New York Times, NPR, Today Show, BBC, and more. As she is also the co-founder of the Student Data Privacy Project, a group dedicated to protecting children's data and privacy in schools. And I think I got us some more time. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you. I am going to talk a little bit more about the parenting side of things because this is my wheelhouse as a parent and a former teacher. I always start my talks by talking about what I think is an extremely important place to begin, which is to replace judgment with curiosity. I always joke that parenting is the judgiest sport I've ever played. Starts from day one. There's nothing more fraught in today's modern world than judgment around screen time. So I invite us all to start here by replacing judgment with curiosity. Rather than judging ourselves or other people, what is it that's causing me to feel this way? Why is it that my children might be interested in this? All of that. For me, we've been hearing the word intentional a lot. This is actually a phrase I came up with about 6 years ago and trademarked, coincidentally. That worked out well. But I define being tech intentional as using tech in a way that enhances, nurtures, and supports ourselves, our children, and our families in a way that aligns with our values, while also resisting, delaying, and limiting screen use that interferes with healthy mental, physical, cognitive, and emotional development, which is a really big definition. And so I've provided you a nice TLDR, which means too long, don't read, or didn't read. And it's this. To me, these are the absolute 3 most important parts of tech intentional parenting. Less is more, later is better, and relationships and skills before screens. I want to talk very briefly about what I see as a very pervasive problem right now. We talk about screen time a lot. In my view and in my experience, both as a parent and a teacher and an advocate, is looking at this as a 2-part challenge. We have at least 2 parts, but the 2 big parts are children's personal device use, so smartwatches, smartphones, social media, gaming, all of the ways in which they engage with technology. But then there is the additional second elephant in the room here, which is the school-issued technology like one-on-one laptops and iPads. So I hear from parents all the time who have rules, they have limits, they have conversations, they do everything at home, and the school sends home a Chromebook. I had a parent the other day tell me that her child had never even been on YouTube until the school computer came home. So I want to acknowledge this because I think this complicates things significantly. The other thing I really want to highlight here is that there are many issues to be aware of regarding children and screens, but we first have to acknowledge that the business model of big tech is extractive, it is manipulative, and it is fundamentally out of alignment with child development. And I stress this because I think the most well-intentioned of us might be approaching this topic with strategies and ideas about how to deal with this existing situation. But I think we have to remember that the business model itself relies on our use of the product. And so for children in particular, you've heard briefly about brain development and executive function. Children's brains are more vulnerable than adult brains, and so they are much more susceptible when they are engaging with screens and digital tech. What is happening is their neural pathways are being stimulated in a very, very convincing, compelling way. So what I always say to parents, it is not you versus your child, it is you versus a hijacked neural pathway. I also, as many of my colleagues here today have said, I want to stress that you're not alone in feeling this way. This is very much a modern day challenge for parents. No other generation has really had to parent in this era. And so we're all in agreement on that. I get asked two questions the most, and I'm going to very briefly talk about these and tell you which questions I would rather you think about instead, because I think they're more helpful. So the first is obviously, how much screen time is too much? The answer to this is not all screen time is the same. Scrolling through TikTok is very different of an experience for your brain and your heart and your mind than FaceTiming with grandma. And so if we were to just give you a simple number, that's not going to necessarily give you very useful information. Also, you can have more than one child in the same family. They could spend the same amount of time doing the exact same thing, and they will have completely different reactions to it. So when we limit ourselves to just a total number, it's problematic. What I say to parents is a little bit's okay and a lot's too much, and it really depends on the kid, the context, the time, the what else is happening, and all of that. The other question I get asked all the time is, what parental controls should I use? I'm just going to say one of my biggest concerns about parental controls is they don't work. If they did, I wouldn't get asked this question all the time. They may provide some semblance of surveillance and control and supervision, but unfortunately, I hear all the time from parents whose kids have found the workarounds. They also cannot monitor in-app content, which is usually one of parents' biggest concern. And the other problem is it uses technology to solve a problem that technology created. And again, if we go back to the extractive business model, that's problematic. So there are two questions I would invite parents to think about instead. Number one, do you know what your child is doing online? And I know you're thinking, but you just told me not to use parental controls. Well, because I believe what's going to happen in order to have this information, you have to have conversations, as several of my colleagues have already highlighted today. And those conversations are going to be fruitful and meaningful when you have a strong relationship with your child. And actually, these are both sort of bidirectional. You have to have a good relationship to know what your child's doing online. And in order to know what your child's doing online, you need a good relationship. And in my view, this is going to happen through lots of what I call sort of drive-by parenting moments, lots of continued conversation. So I want to highlight 3 habits of tech-intentional families. My favorite to provide is this one called living your life out loud. This just means narrating what you do as you do it anytime it comes to digital technology. So I'm reaching for my phone, I'm checking the weather, I want to see what time soccer practice starts, I'm going to look and see if it's bad traffic. Oh, I just got a text from your friend's mom. It's literally nonstop play-by-play. It is working when your child starts rolling their eyes, is what I like to say. And please note that this is advice for parents first. I really think parents have to start this before they can have their children do it. But the idea is to get the whole family involved in this because it brings awareness. It can increase our executive function, how we use this as a tool versus a toy. We can talk about our emotional experience and interactions with it as well. But this is my favorite tip to give. It's free. You can start it today. And it takes practice, and you'll start to notice how many people don't do it when you start doing it. Along those lines, this is one of the most powerful sentences that I was ever taught. There is so much that we don't know about parenting in the digital age that we're learning on the go, that this can be a very disarming phrase. So we can say to our kids, oh my gosh, I forgot to teach you that when we go to a restaurant, it's really rude to look at phones, and so we're going to all put them away. Or I forgot to teach you that when we visit our grandparents, they're really wanting to spend time with you, so we're not going to have our devices out. That goes for all of us. We can put ourselves into this category, model what we want to see, and this phrase allows us to make this less about us versus our child and more of that side-to-side parenting versus the head-to-head. I want to talk briefly about something that I hear all the time. Parents will say, I need my child to have a phone or a watch to be safe. I really want to emphasize that there is a big difference between what is scary and what is dangerous. I use the 2 images here in my talks to talk about the fact that even though sharks are scary and frightening, they are extremely rare in terms of dying in a shark attack. In fact, our statistical chances of that is 1 in 4 million. But we also don't think about our bathtubs as dangerous and scary, and yet our risk of dying in a bathtub is 1 in 10,000. And, I always joke we don't have bathtub week on TV, and we don't hear about, terrible bathtub deaths in the news all the time. And part of that is because of our own 24/7 consumption of news media, because we're constantly tethered to our devices. Our experience of what is scary versus dangerous is really distorted. On that note, Pew Research found last year that the top 3 parental fears in the United States are youth mental health, bullying, and kidnapping. And as Sesame Street used to say, one of these things is not like the other. Statistically speaking, kidnapping is almost nil. It is so rare. In fact, somebody did the math. If you wanted your child to be kidnapped, of course, no one does, you would have to have your child stand outside every day for 750,000 years to be guaranteed of being kidnapped. And that is not a reality. Now, the problem is when parents say, oh, I'm giving my child a watch or a phone to keep them from being kidnapped, keep them safe. What happens? We increase number one and number two. We make youth mental health. We increase cyberbullying risk by providing an internet connected device. So what I invite parents to do is think about what is the scary and what is the dangerous here. Kidnapping might be scary. It is not statistically dangerous. Mental health declines are very real. Bullying is very real, but we do not have a kidnapping crisis in this country. We do have a mental health crisis in this country. I also want to end by saying that this is extremely important in terms of brain development, in terms of learning, in terms of building skills that will matter for future adulthood. Children are not small adults. Their brains are very different. And that friction is something that technology claims to help us with, that makes our lives easier and more convenient. And I would like to push back and say that friction is fundamentally a good thing. It is in moments of friction that learning happens. Learning is through struggle. It is through making connections. Knowledge is not the same thing as information. Yes, we can get lots of information from tools. We do not always get knowledge from that. Another parenting strategy that has worked for my family is to share a phone and save a tween. I have been sharing my phone with my 13-year-old now for a year and a half. Is it perfect? No. Is it frustrating? Yes. Is it exciting and insightful? Always. And so I've written a bit about that on my blog, which you can look up for essays on that. Finally, I just want to remind people that later is better, less is more. Relationships and skills have to come before screens. This is a fight worth having. And if you want to learn more, I wrote a book. I do free webinars, and I didn't have a whole lot of time to talk about the EdTech piece, but that is something I do a lot of work on, and I have an Unplug EdTech toolkit for free on my website for parents who want to push back on some of that school tech. So
Thank you so much, Emily. Yeah, I sped you up and you just delivered. And in fact, you delivered so much. You answered a couple of the questions that I was going to ask you. So I'm just going to transition us into the group Q&A. So let's go. And let me see. Where shall I start? And please, all of you, just, kind of lean in if you want to answer something that you feel is just really for you. So here we go. What are the best ways to support your children when you put in boundaries on a digital device use, but their friends' parents, do not? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I will.
Yeah, go for it, Emily.
You can only control what goes on in your own house. And the most important thing you can do is have ongoing conversations about what is in alignment with your family's values and having your kids come to you. That's, I think it was Adam who said that, the most important thing is to have them come to you when, not if, they see something that makes them uncomfortable. So starting in your own home.
Yep, I would completely and totally agree. Next question, I feel like a game show host. How can parents best discuss this issue with other parents?
I really liked it. I think it was Emily's point of the non-judgmental. And so I don't think that people struggle to talk about this issue with other parents. I think that it comes up all the time. So I think just normalizing that, hey, this is frustrating for all of us. Like, we're all in this together. And then just really supportive, right? Supporting and validating, just to help increase that parental media efficacy, I think is great.
Perfect. Thank you. And if anybody else feels like they're burning to just add in, please feel free. I think another question that I've kind of picked up throughout everybody's talk is just this idea of, we all want to set limits, especially on social media or even gaming, but how can we do this without impeding on your child's social life? Because they're, gaming, they're chatting, they're connecting on social media. They're also with their friends. So what do you have for us? How can we set limits?
I'll jump in and say I would focus on where the child's pain point is. There's something that is bothering them too, as the parent is lecturing or setting limits or restricting or worried. and sort of this mutual back and forth of annoying each other as the parent lectures and the child is just trying to be a kid and do what everyone else is doing. I would try to lean in on two questions. One is, what is actually bothering the kid? What does the kid want to do that they're not able to do? And second, what is the kid himself or herself or themselves struggling with? What are they still improving on? And if the kid is old enough and motivated to make changes and get more access, is there something that they could then communicate to their parent that they are acknowledging with intention, with awareness that they are struggling with, and then there could be a collaborative approach to that topic.
Great. And Sarah, I know you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on with that. So something that I really love about this particular question and a strategy that I try to use with my own kids, so 4 of the 5 have smartphones, is to help them set their own limits. And I learned this. So my first one, I was like really heavy handed and we had like all the filters and all the limits and all the things, and it like backfired. It didn't go well. And so something that I really talk about with my younger kids is that, they set the limits. They say, hey, how long do you want to spend on Snapchat? And so then they set it up in their own phone and then they get the things. And then it's like an ongoing conversation. And I feel like that has been at least more effective in our family than like me being more heavy handed.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I love that idea about setting things together. I do the same thing with my own children, asking them, what do you think? And if you want to have chat open, do you think you need to? Do you have to talk with your friends? And just kind of going through all of the parental control features with them and saying, what do you really need? And I would say 8 times out of 10, they've pulled the things out. They're like, oh yeah, you're right. I don't need that. I just want to play the game. Or I just want to, do socialize. I don't need to necessarily see where everybody is on the map. So all that kind of good stuff. Go, Emily,
I
please.
was just going to say too, first of all, it's okay to have children who don't use social media, don't have phones. There's a growing movement of young people who are opting out or choosing not to participate. I also think it's really important to keep in mind that if the FOMO is bad without it, wait till they get it. Because it is normal to be a middle school student, for example, and feel left out, to feel like your friends are doing things without you. So another option is to be, make your home the one that people want to come and be in. Provide non-screen based activities for your family, your children and their friends. And acknowledge that it may just be a bummer of a situation, and that's part of life. I think that part of what kids need is to know that it is okay to be different from their friends and not just do something because everyone else is doing it.
Oh, but Emily, you're preaching to the choir. I'm sure everyone here is just like, yes, of course. But the parents are, that's a hard one. It really is a hard one. But these tips and strategies, they're out there. Parents, let's go. There's one of the questions is, how does one decide the quality of media? And we're talking about games, given that some games may be educational. And I was going to jump in myself because I found a great resource recently called Family Gaming Database by Andy Robertson. He's a BBC technology reporter over here in the UK. And he has created this. So if you have your child who's asking for, let's say Call of Duty or something else that is inappropriate for their age, you can go on this gaming database and find an alternative that is at the right age and something that you can explain. And he's done a really nifty job of going in and telling you what is for digital well-being, what is for creativity, how to empower them. And I also think, obviously, one of my favorites is Common Sense Media, which I've seen that all of you have been referencing. And so it's just really exciting. And I'm also going to say I'm on the Common Sense Media UK advisory, and I have an event afterwards. So I'm just glad that we are speeding through here, you guys. So our question, and for you, not for me, is what do you suggest for parents of teens who use digital media as their primary way to, wait for it, de-stress after school? Adam, I'm going to start with you just because I know that you have lots of patience.
I would acknowledge that the most popular coping strategy on the planet is avoidance. We as animals avoid things just like other animals that make us uncomfortable, that give us some level of distress or pain. And I would acknowledge that. And chances are, if you were to say that to your teenager, they would probably nod along. And so then it becomes that line, as I talked about earlier, not necessarily clinical line, but the line of concern of, are they escaping? Are they distracting themselves away from other things that are priorities? And as we've talked about, a couple of people said the term executive functioning. That's a developmental thing over the course of 25 to 30 years old. And prioritizing, the ability to prioritize is literally an executive functioning that develops over those 25 or so years. So these phones and social media dialogue connections literally hijack and disrupt our abilities as humans to prioritize. And so I wouldn't say all that to your teen, but I would try to get them to think about how are they prioritizing, knowing that escaping is going to be part of the pull.
100%. Sarah, please.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think it's incredibly normal. So I would validate and normalize. I mean, my favorite way to de-stress is to watch Bridgerton after a long day at work, right?
I do. I like you, Sarah. I knew it.
We can be friends. We can be friends. I do a lot of research with younger kids. And so I'm going to answer a little bit of that because I think we build this and it will pay off dividends later in the teenage years. But I really, really like John Gottman's emotion coaching. And so that's all about like, how do I deal with difficult emotions? How do I deal with stress? How do I deal with anger, right? And it's about labeling the emotion, validating it, and then kind of what Adam was talking about, what is in your toolbox for dealing with that emotion, for dealing with that stress and so on. Media can be one, probably shouldn't be the only one. And so we want to start at age 2. And then it'll hopefully pay off dividends later on.
Great. Thank you. Absolutely loved it. So a question now, perhaps Kathleen or Emily, if you like this one, let me know. What do you recommend for families who have multiple children that might need different media boundaries due to age or behavior? And I'm going to add something else on that, not just multiple children, but let's also add in neurodivergent children, just because I know that I see this a lot and I want to make sure that we talk about it.
It's a really good question, and I like this question because it does acknowledge that there is not a one size fits all approach, and I think we just really need to keep that in mind. We're getting a lot of questions. I'm just having a look at some of the questions that kept coming through on the chat about what is the right age for this, and how do I know when? And I think the answer is it depends on your child, and it can't necessarily just be done by a blanket thing like age either. Oh, they're 16, therefore, that there are, it's like in Australia, we've just had this social media ban announced, for under 16s. And as I've said, well, what's magic about the age 16? Well, of course, nothing, that's another topic. Yeah. Yeah. So it is about acknowledging the differences in your child and particularly young people that are neurodivergent. And I don't have expertise to talk on that, so I'm not going to. I'm going to let someone else, talk about that. I think it does definitely add to the parenting challenge because trying to tailor different approaches to the needs of young people does increase the parenting burden. But I think having, I talked about a tech agreement and that kind of negotiation. I think sitting down and doing that with each child and a conversation about how you might approach this and the different rules for each child is a good place to start. I know it's probably difficult to enforce, but having those different conversations with the different young person based on their personality, their age.
Well, let me interrupt
Talking about
here,
why.
Kathleen. Let me interrupt because I just want to twist it a little bit. So imagine that you're sitting there and you've got your two children. I'm going to take different ages. One is 5, one is 11. This is, I think, the big struggle. So what can parents do then? How are they going to handle these different media boundaries?
Look, I think you probably have those conversations separately rather than together. And I think also the difference between a 5-year-old and an 11-year-old is, and look, I wouldn't necessarily advocate doing a tech agreement with a 5-year-old. I just think, at that kind of age, that is very young. I think their parents are still very much probably have a lot more control. They don't have their own devices. Certainly you can start having the kind of conversations with a 5-year-old, an age-appropriate conversation about the internet, about technology, about content that they might see on screen. They are different conversations and they are going to be different approaches. So something with a 5-year-old, as I said, I don't think that's going to be so much of a negotiation.
I'm looking at Adam to see if he's going to say how many 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds he sees, but he hasn't chimed in, so I think we're okay, Catherine. Emily, I just want to point to you because you look like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, again, when we think about sort of how technology is used by children today, it's individuals with individual devices doing their own individual thing. When we think about even 10, 20 years ago, it was like fighting over the remote control, fighting over what show to watch. And there's actually benefit to that when you think about the skills that come from negotiating with your sibling, I don't want to watch that show, or that's not appropriate for this age group. So a lot of that's still here and it's still important. And I would argue is actually still part of a really healthy childhood experience. On ADHD, or executive function challenges and neurodiversity, I would love to point people to Michael McLeod's work at Grow Now ADHD. I did a webinar with him. It's on my website. He works specifically with families with children with ADHD, and he has a very specific, clear take on screens, and that it is a different scenario with children with neurodiversities. And so I would point people to that as well, because it is different and it is
100%. Yeah, which is the reason why I wanted to flag it, because it's something that I really, really see. And I think one or two of you might have mentioned about screens in the living room or something like that. But we have a specific question here about, should children be allowed to have screens in the bedroom? I know I have my take, but I would love to hear somebody pick up on what they're going to say. And I know you're going to tell me about different ages. I can feel it.
Yeah. Developmental psychologist. Depends on the kid, depends on the device, depends on the age, depends on what we're doing.
Are you still not all lawyers like me? Because really, it's just all I've been hearing is it depends.
It's the worst. It's so hard because like it used to be easy. It's like, oh yeah, no TVs in the bedroom. Like that was like okay, we're not gonna have a TV in the bedroom. But now like everything is portable, right? And so my kids have devices in the bedroom at certain times, to text their friend or to do homework, right, on their Chromebook or whatever. Our rule is no devices in the bedroom for bedtime and overnight. That one, and it's a challenge. Like my older kids, like we have to fight that constantly, like bring your device down and so on. But yeah, I feel like I was always like a stalwart, no screens in the bedroom. It's just different now.
Right.
And so now it just kind of depends for me.
It is so reassuring and refreshing to know that I am not the only one, the only expert in this space who also has to deal with these challenges, because I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. And yeah, getting those devices out of the bedrooms at night or nighttime is something. Yeah. And especially when they're much, much taller than you are. They're 6'9" and 6'3". What was that, Adam? You're going to give me?
I was just going to add that this is an evolving thing like other parenting landscapes. This is a little bit more confusing because most of us didn't, or at least older parents like myself, didn't grow up with a phone. This is all new. Again, I'm not going to talk about digital immigrants at this point, but it's part of where we're at right now. So as you have a child who's younger, you might have some rules around certain technologies that are just not allowed in the bedroom at all. And then as they get older, some of that's going to shift. And the one line that I'm just going to repeat, because I think it's huge for sleep deprivation concerns that I see every day, is at bedtime. And I just wanted to highlight that from what Sarah said, and everyone's nodding.
Yes, for sure.
It doesn't matter that it's a battle. It's really basic. And if the child, teenager, 15, 16, 17-year-old, 18, different story. But in those later teenage years, if they're going to battle you on that, I think there's a different conversation we need to have, because then they're looking to stay up deep into the night, like some of their friends are. And then there's going to be consequence the next day in terms of their mood, attention, and ability to function at their job, which is school.
I love it. Yeah.
But it has to be parents' devices out of the bedroom too. This is the other piece. I think the modeling of that is so important. And it is so much harder to tell your teenager, well, you have to put your phone in this spot than I don't. And I always hear it's an alarm clock. Alarm clocks still work. They're not connected to the internet. Put your phone even on the other side of the room, baby step it if you have to. But you're going to get a lot further in your conversations about screen time with your child if you're modeling that behavior as well.
Completely agree. And I just think that we should probably stay in this little bucket too about, getting children off their devices or it's just having that intentional approach that we're all talking about. What are some strategies just to get, and I'm going to say younger children, to get them to transition off their devices to an activity? What have you got? What's your best tip?
I would love to answer this because we've actually studied transitions around media for younger children. So what most parents do is like, okay, it's time to be done, right? Turn your screen off now, stop, right? And that often results in like a tantrum or like hey, I just need 5 more minutes. I just need to finish this. I need to finish my level. I need to do this, right? And so just like with any sort of transition with a young child, like we're going to go to the park, we're going to go get your shoes on, all of these things, you want to pre-arm them. Okay. So like what works effectively is to give them hey, we're going to finish in about 10 minutes. I'd love for you to finish up your game. How long do you have in your episode? Like, let's finish that. Let's have a completion. Let's have a goal here. And then we're going to transition to this activity. Right. And then you give them a reminder at 5 minutes. Sometimes we set timers, right? Hey, you can see it going down. Okay, now I know. And then they're way more likely to transition effectively. But if you just say, turn off your phone, turn off your TV, they're like, so you're going to get like a big pushback there.
Agree. And I think it's interesting too, because you talked about the younger children. So what does anyone here on the panel, what do you think we can do with teens? And with teens, I'm just talking about more, not the transitions, but more of the safety steps. How can we really get our teens to think about, sharing inappropriate content, not sharing it, but not sharing it. How can we get them to think about online safety and just responsible tech use in general? Catherine, yeah.
I'm happy to take that one. Look, again, it comes back to that conversation when you're talking about older children, and again, having those conversations early. And as I said earlier, not just doing the risk talk. So, like when there was concern about sexting, so girls sending semi-nude photos to other people, there was a real kind of little bit of a panic about that. And I'm like, a lot of messaging around the time was just don't do it, but that kind of messaging doesn't work. Saying don't do this, don't do that, don't look at porn. It's not a helpful conversation to have. So again, I think about having that dialogue, but also asking your child about their online experiences. Have they encountered anything, or do they ever encounter anything that's upsetting? What was it? How did it make them feel? Acknowledging also that a lot of young people already have strategies for addressing some of these online risks, for example. I've done some research which has shown that even some quite young people can recognize where there's a risk and can at least, in theory, state what they would do to mitigate that risk. What they actually ever do in practice is usually a different story. So I think trying to avoid that kind of deficit model of assuming that young people don't know anything, that they lack judgment, that they're going to do something stupid is probably not the best conversation to have. But again, more of a dialogue, not a lecture. Helping your child perhaps to think through some of the risks and how they might address those, and that if they do encounter anything online which is concerning for them, you want to make sure that they will come to you for help.
Agreed, 100%. I'm just going to switch us just to one other topic. If we have enough time, I will try to get back to the band's question. But there's something that's just been on my mind, and I think because we are all in on different continents, actually. I just think, how do we talk to our teens and children about some of the things that they are seeing and hearing and reading online that's misinformation, disinformation, that's creating these different bubbles, that is just, I would say, impacting their mental health as far as making them question who they are, what they believe, what they think is cool, what's not cool, what is the truth, what's the not truth. So does anyone have any ideas about that? Just because we are really in a different world right now, and how can we? And I'm not just talking about Andrew Tate and a lot of the misogyny and things that we've seen online, cancel culture, et cetera. Just all of these things that are in their feeds. How do we empower them with that critical thinking and that heart and then the values to be human?
I'll start.
Oh, go for it. Oh, everybody liked that question. Yay! I love it. Okay,
I'll be really brief and just state the obvious to lean in with empathy. Baked into your question was the reality of what we all, depending on how much you're paying attention, are processing and taking in terms of the volume that I've talked about. And I would encourage our kids and us to be mindful and intentional, with purpose around the notifications. If every time you pick up your phone, there's a list of notifications of horrific and mind-boggling headlines from real time, that is going to disrupt your ability to prioritize what's in front of you. That is probably actually more important, unless there's a level of danger. So I would lean in with empathy, and I would encourage being mindful around notifications being on or off, depending on the situation.
Great. Thank you. Emily, saw you jump too.
Yes, I would just like to again say that there's a complicating factor here with the school issued technology. That part of the problem is that we're handing out devices to children in the name of education, but not teaching the skills part that needs to come before the screens part. So things like typing, but also citations, understanding mis and disinformation, media literacy in the modern context. And what I would really like to see is, again, a purposeful use of technology, and that to remind people that ed tech is not the same as tech ed, that we can teach children about technology without relying on technology to teach it. And so I do think, I personally am very concerned about the threat that this poses to civil institutions, democracy, critical thinking, when we provide too much, too soon, too young, without the scaffolding and support. And in my view, that is going to come through a well-informed educator and parents who have, an understanding of what they're up against. But I don't see a lot of that happening. That is part of what my concern is.
Which is why I posed the question. And over to you, Catherine. Tell us because
So Emily's touched on this already, but I think, critical media literacy is so important. And I agree with Emily that, there has been this kind of, there's been this sort of tech utopianism around, device use in schools. It's the way of the future, and we need to embrace them. And that's a whole different conversation. But yes, there needs to be digital media literacy, and we really need to cultivate the skills in young people in school to think laterally when how do they verify information online. And this is not something that we can necessarily rely on parents to do either, because adults, I'm sure you've all got a friend on Facebook or someone who shares some kind of clearly, incorrect or kind of conspiracy theory or whatever. Adults also fall into this trap as well. But yes, you're right. Misinformation, disinformation, but also some of those online influencers who do have problematic views, whether they're racist or sexist or misogynistic, that's not just one talk. That is cultivating these really, really critical skills, early on in young people. And I really do think that this is critically important.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that you emphasize this ongoing discussion, and because that's something that I would always say in my talks, is that it's not a one-off. You're not just going to sit there and talk to them about sexting, and then it's one time and it's, oh, I did it. It's instead of sitting there for keeping your kid in front of you for 100 minutes with a lecture, I would say speak 1 minute 100 times and just keep going, just to keep reminding them. But we are all out of time. Did you guys notice how fast that went? It was just like, wow. I know that Kris is going to be coming on in for a second, but I just wanted to personally thank the four of you because, again, I've been in this space for a while, and it is so interesting to have these different takes, to really hear the psychology point of view. For me, Adam, it's always just invaluable to have somebody who's actually talking to kids, tell us what the kids say, and write about what the kids are doing. Sarah, same thing. It's just to be out there and to be in the midst of it. And Catherine doing the research, and you, Emily, having been an educator. I mean, you were right there with those kids, so and that's a different lens for us as well. I mean, I just think it's wonderful. And so I would just suggest to everyone to get on the Children's and Screens Institute to rewatch this, and also to connect with all of these people, because the resources, as we say in California, they were off the hook. So Kris, it's over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and the entire panel for this thoughtful discussion on how parents and caregivers can effectively guide their children's media use in a way that reduces conflict, fosters independence, and helps guard against the development of problematic or addictive media use. If you found today's webinar insightful, help us keep the conversation going. Your donation ensures we can continue bringing you expert advice through Ask the Experts webinars. It's easy to give. Just scan the QR code on your screen, click the link in the chat, or visit our website at childrenandscreens.org. Together, we can make a difference.